In a stunning move that has shaken the foundations of global economics, West African nations have taken a bold step forward, launching a single, unified currency and distancing themselves from Western financial influence. This isn't just about money. It's about sovereignty, unity, and rewriting the rules of the game. For decades, many West African nations relied on the CFA Franc, a colonial-era currency originally introduced by France. Despite gaining independence, these countries were never truly free in terms of monetary policy. Their central banks operated under French oversight, and their reserves were held in the French treasury. But now, all of that is changing. After years of negotiation and planning, leaders from across West Africa have agreed to implement a single currency designed, controlled, and issued by Africans for Africans. It's a powerful symbol of defiance and independence. The new currency, provisionally called the Kora, represents a strategic departure from dependency and a move toward a self-reliant, Pan-African future. This monumental shift comes at a time of growing tension between many African nations and Western powers. African leaders have increasingly criticized institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and even Western governments for maintaining systems that keep Africa economically subservient. The introduction of a single West African currency is a direct response to this frustration. The idea of a single African currency has been discussed for decades under the African Union and ECOWS, the Economic Community of West African States. However, it was often seen as a dream deferred, blocked by foreign interests or internal disunity. But in recent years, that sentiment has shifted. A new generation of African leaders, including figures like Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traore and Mali's Assimi Goïta, have embraced revolutionary thinking and unapologetic nationalism. They've rejected foreign military bases, expelled Western NGOs, and now they're rewriting the region's economic future. With the launch of this currency, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Niger, and possibly others are forming a financial alliance that bypasses Western financial structures entirely. So how does this currency work? It's backed not by European treasuries, but by Africa's own vast natural wealth: gold, lithium, uranium, bauxite, and more. Instead of pegging the currency to the euro or dollar, West African nations are developing a valuation system tied to their regional production and resource reserves. This model aims to ensure stability and shield the currency from Western market manipulation. In practical terms, this new currency means easier trade between West African nations, elimination of costly exchange fees, and the ability to build a shared monetary policy that reflects the region's actual needs, not the interests of distant powers. It also boosts local industries by supporting import substitution, regional manufacturing, and Pan-African trade. But of course, the road ahead won't be without challenges. There are logistical hurdles integrating financial systems, training institutions, and ensuring stability. There will also be fierce resistance from outside forces. The West has long benefited from Africa's financial dependence. A truly independent African currency threatens the grip of institutions like the CFA zone and undermines centuries of control. Already, there are reports of diplomatic pressure, economic threats, and media campaigns aimed at discrediting the move. But West Africa is standing firm. For the first time in modern history, multiple nations are banding together to reject economic colonization and embrace unity on their own terms. This isn't just a currency, it's a declaration of independence. And the momentum is spreading. Other regions in Africa are watching closely. Central African countries, frustrated by similar dependencies, are now considering a similar model. Southern and Eastern African nations may also follow suit. What started as a regional revolution could become continental. If this currency succeeds, it may inspire a broader movement that reshapes the entire African economic landscape, challenging the dominance of the US dollar and euro, and empowering Africa to negotiate with global powers from a position of strength. What we're witnessing is not just economic policy, it's a continental awakening. For too long, Africa has been seen as a pawn in global finance. Now West Africa is showing the world that it can and will be the master of its own destiny. The era of dependence is over. The age of African unity has begun. Another historic development is unfolding in West Africa, and this time, it's about energy, technology, and total independence from foreign control. In an unprecedented move, a coalition of West African nations has launched a Pan-African energy grid, built entirely without Western investment or oversight. Yes, you heard that right. These nations are coming together to generate, store, and distribute electricity using African resources, African engineers, and African funding. This grid is not just a technological marvel. It's a symbol of total liberation from the systems that have held the continent back for generations. For decades, power shortages have crippled development across Africa. Even in resource-rich nations, unreliable electricity has stifled industry, hospitals, schools, and daily life. Meanwhile, foreign energy firms extracted resources and exported the profits, leaving little behind. But now, West Africa is changing the script. This new energy grid, coordinated by countries including Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Senegal, is being powered by an ambitious mix of solar, hydroelectric, and geothermal energy. These nations are using Africa's abundant sunshine and river systems to generate clean, affordable electricity. It's green energy, but more importantly, it's sovereign energy. What's even more impressive is how they're building it. African universities, local construction companies, and regional tech startups are collaborating on design, infrastructure, and innovation. They've created battery storage systems, microgrids for rural areas, and even African-made smart meters, all without relying on Western tech monopolies. And funding? No loans from the IMF. No aid from the World Bank. This entire project is being backed by a new Pan-African Development Fund, fueled by gold reserves, cryptocurrency innovations, and voluntary contributions from regional governments and citizens. The results are already visible. Rural villages that once had no power now have 24/7 electricity. Schools are using laptops. Hospitals can run labs and refrigeration. Entrepreneurs are building small businesses. And in urban centers, blackouts are becoming a thing of the past. But make no mistake, this isn't just about power. It's about power in every sense of the word. The West has long used energy dependence as a tool of leverage in Africa. Western corporations controlled oil fields, dams, and power stations. Foreign aid often came with strings attached: privatization, foreign ownership, and extractive contracts. Now, West African leaders are saying, never again. By creating their own grid. On their own terms, these nations are freeing themselves from energy colonialism. They're showing that development doesn't require permission from Washington, Paris, or London. It only requires courage, cooperation, and a commitment to put Africa first. And once again, the ripple effects are massive. Other African countries are taking notice. Talks have already begun about linking this West African grid to Central Africa and even parts of East Africa, creating the beginnings of a continental supergrid. Imagine what that means. A future where Africa no longer imports electricity, but exports it. Where young engineers don't leave for Europe, but stay to innovate at home. Where power doesn't flow to foreign bank accounts, but lights up African dreams. West Africa is rising. And with each solar panel, each hydro dam, each volt of clean, independent energy, it's electrifying a new vision of freedom and unity. In a bold demonstration of unity and technological ambition, West African nations have just unveiled their latest achievement, the launch of a regional satellite network built entirely without Western assistance. This move not only marks a significant leap forward in Africa's space capabilities, it also sends a clear message to the world. West Africa is charting its own course with eyes set firmly on the skies. The project, known as AfriSat-1, is a multi-satellite program designed for communication, surveillance, weather tracking, and agricultural monitoring. The initiative is being led by Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Niger, and Togo, with support from local scientists, universities, and regional space agencies. What makes this different from past efforts is the complete rejection of foreign control. Unlike earlier African satellites that were funded, built, or launched under Western or Chinese contracts, AfriSat-1 is 100% African engineered. The satellites are designed by African aerospace students and engineers, built with regional resources, and launched with the assistance of African allies like Algeria and South Africa, whose space agencies provided technical support. The primary goal? Strategic independence. These satellites will serve as powerful tools for security, allowing governments to monitor borders, track illegal mining, and fight terrorism in real time without relying on U.S. or French satellite data. They will also enable accurate weather forecasting, disaster preparedness, and real-time environmental monitoring, critical for countries facing the impacts of climate change. But perhaps most importantly, the satellites will power a new wave of independent communication infrastructure. By providing high-speed internet, GPS, and mobile coverage across remote regions, AfriSat-1 is connecting people who were once digitally cut off. Schools, hospitals, farmers, and entrepreneurs now have access to tools that were once out of reach, and the benefits don't stop there. This project has ignited a massive wave of interest in STEM education across the region. Thousands of young Africans, inspired by seeing their own countries enter the space race, are enrolling in physics, engineering, and computer science programs. Space tech startups are popping up in Ouagadougou, Conakry, Bamako, and Niamey. New generation of scientists is rising, one that is proud, Pan-African, and no longer seeking validation from the West. Critics outside Africa were quick to question the need for satellites in a region still battling poverty. But West African leaders responded clearly, "We are poor because we were kept dependent. We are now investing in independence." And they're right. Space is not just about ambition, it's about ownership of the future. For too long, Africa's skies were monitored by foreign powers. Now Africa is watching its own skies. Western media, predictably, downplayed the accomplishment. But the people didn't. Across cities and villages, crowds gathered to watch the live feed of the launch. Cheers erupted as the satellite pierced the atmosphere. Children waved flags. Elders wept. It was more than a rocket, it was a revolution. This is just the beginning. Plans are already underway for AfriSat 2 and 3, which will include satellites for climate data, mineral mapping, and even telemedicine. A Pan-African Space Training Academy is also being launched to train engineers from all across the continent. West. Africa isn't asking for a seat at the global table anymore, they're building their own table. In space. They've found not just new frontiers, but a new identity, sovereign, united, and limitless. In another groundbreaking move that signals a cultural and educational renaissance, West African nations have come together to abolish Western-imposed school curriculums and launch a unified indigenous education system rooted in African history, languages, science, and values. For too long, African children were taught from textbooks that glorified colonial empires, erased African contributions to civilization, and promoted a worldview where the West was the standard of knowledge and power. But now, a coalition of nations led by Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and Niger has decided enough is enough. Under the new system, schools across the region will no longer follow outdated French or British curricula. Instead, they will teach African-centered history, regional languages like Bambara, Hausa, and Fulani, and celebrate the philosophies, inventions, and struggles of African ancestors. Students will learn about empires like Mali, Songhai, Ghana, and Benin, not just ancient Greece and Rome. Math and science will still be taught, but with a strong emphasis on African innovations in agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and metallurgy. Students will explore the legacy of African engineers who built irrigation systems, pyramids, and trade routes long before European contact. Philosophy classes will feature thinkers like Cheikh Anta Diop, Amilcar Cabral, Thomas Sankara, and even oral wisdom passed down through griots. What's revolutionary about this education system is that it doesn't reject global knowledge, it just refuses to be defined by it. Instead of Eurocentrism, students are taught Afrocentrism with global awareness. They learn how to engage with the world without losing themselves in it. Language reform is also central to this transformation. Instead of prioritizing only French or English, regional languages are being promoted in classrooms and textbooks. Multilingualism is encouraged, and literacy programs have been redesigned to support native language fluency before introducing foreign languages. For many students, this is the first time they're truly understanding what they read because it's in a language they speak at home. This movement has been met with massive support from communities and teachers, many of whom say they've waited their whole lives for this change. Parents have noticed children returning home more curious and more proud of who they are. Students are engaging with the material like never before because they see themselves in it. To support this educational revolution, West African universities are also being reformed. New departments focused on African innovation, herbal medicine, traditional law, and cultural studies are emerging. Degree programs are being accredited within African institutions, reducing the need to seek Western validation. But perhaps most powerfully, teacher training has been overhauled. Instead of relying on Western manuals, educators are now trained using community knowledge, elder mentorship, and indigenous teaching methods that prioritize dialogue, storytelling, and group problem solving over rote memorization. Of course, the backlash from outside has already begun. Western NGOs and education foundations, many of which profited from pushing standardized curriculums, have raised concerns about quality and competitiveness. But West African leaders are firm. The goal is not to compete in someone else's system, it's to create their own. This new curriculum is not just about classrooms. It's about liberating the African mind. It's about giving future generations the tools to think critically, innovate locally, and lead proudly without internalizing inferiority. and this model is already spreading. Central African nations are sending delegations to study the system. Diaspora communities around the world are asking for access to these new materials. There is talk of creating a digital Pan-African university with courses taught by African scholars, available in multiple native languages. In a world that tried to erase Africa's intellectual legacy, West Africa is writing a new chapter in its own voice, with its own ink on its own terms. Education is power, and West Africa is making sure that power stays home. In yet another stunning act of regional self-determination, West African nations have just announced the creation of a Pan-African Defense Alliance, a unified military pact designed to protect the sovereignty, resources, and people of the region, without any interference from foreign powers. This new alliance, named the Sahel Security Shield 3S, is a historic milestone. For the first time, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and potentially others have merged their military capabilities into a single regional force. The message is loud and clear. No more foreign boots, no more imposed wars, and no more neo-colonial military dominance. This initiative was born out of hard lessons. For years, West African nations hosted foreign military forces under the guise of fighting terrorism or stabilization missions. French troops, U.S. drones, and UN forces all operated within the region. But despite billions in funding and decades of presence, terrorism expanded, instability persisted, and trust deteriorated. Leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso and Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali have openly criticized these missions, accusing them of prolonging conflict to maintain control over African land and resources. As these leaders began to expel foreign military bases and personnel, it became clear that an alternative was needed, an African solution to African problems. That solution is now reality. The Sahel Security Shield is structured with joint command centers, shared intelligence systems, and integrated training academies. Troops are being trained not just in conventional warfare, but also in counterinsurgency, border control, cyber defense, and anti-drone technology. Member states are pooling resources and sharing weapons manufacturing through new regional arms factories, reducing reliance on expensive and conditional Western military contracts. What's different about this alliance is not just that it's African-led. It's Pan-African in philosophy and grassroots in spirit. Local defense units, often made up of volunteers and community militias, are being formally incorporated into the system, trained professionally, and given recognition as legitimate defenders of their nations. The alliance also includes a social defense component. Unlike previous military coalitions, the Sahel Security Shield invests in education, infrastructure, and economic development in vulnerable regions, recognizing that long-term security must come with justice and opportunity, not just weapons. Already. This new alliance has pushed back against insurgent groups in multiple zones, reclaimed territory, and restored peace in areas once abandoned. And all of it was done without asking for foreign permission or foreign troops. Of course, the geopolitical shockwaves are immense. Western governments are deeply concerned. Military contracts are being canceled. Bases are being dismantled. Influence is slipping. There have been attempts to discredit the alliance through international media, labeling it dangerous or radical. But none of that has stopped its rise. Other African countries are watching with admiration. Some are even in talks to join. There's growing discussion of a continental defense framework inspired by the West African model. African nations. that once looked outward for protection are beginning to look inward and to each other. Asterisk. Perhaps the most symbolic moment came during the first joint parade of the Sahel Security Shield in Ouagadougou. Thousands of African soldiers marched side by side, carrying both national flags and a shared Pan-African banner. Crowds erupted in applause. Elderly freedom fighters wept. Young people chanted slogans of unity. It wasn't just a military display, it was a message to the world. Africa will protect Africa. This alliance marks the end of the narrative that Africa must rely on others for its own defense. It is the beginning of a new era, one where strength is defined not by foreign presence, but by African solidarity. The Sahel is no longer a playground for foreign armies. It is now a fortress of African unity. Asterisk. In yet another revolutionary step toward reclaiming sovereignty, West African nations have now launched a unified African digital payment system, a secure, borderless, and fully African-controlled alternative to Western platforms like SWIFT, Visa, and MasterCard. Asterisk. This game-changing development is called Kujenga Pay, from the Swahili word kujenga, meaning to build. And that's exactly what it's doing, building a digital financial ecosystem that operates outside the control of the West and puts African economies on a path to true independence. Asterisk. For decades, African nations have depended on foreign financial networks to process cross-border payments, manage international trade, and even conduct basic online transactions. Whether it was a bank transfer between two neighboring countries or a rural farmer trying to sell goods to a neighboring market, the money often had to route through Europe or the U.S. with high fees, delays, and constant oversight from Western institutions. Asterisk. Worse still, these systems could be weaponized. African countries that challenged global power dynamics were often targeted with sanctions or financial blacklisting, effectively cutting them off from global commerce. But not anymore. Kujenga Pay changes the game entirely. Developed collaboratively by tech teams in Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, and Senegal, and built on blockchain-based infrastructure, Kujenga Pay allows African individuals, businesses, and governments to make instant, transparent, and secure transactions in their own currencies, or using the new regional currency launched earlier this year. Asterisk. No SWIFT codes, no Western approval, no foreign currency exchange traps. Asterisk. With Kujenga Pay, a vendor in Guinea can sell produce to a buyer in Togo with the tap of a phone. A university in Mali can pay a supplier in Niger instantly. Even remittances from the African diaspora can be processed directly, bypassing the global remittance giants that used to siphon off huge fees from African families. Asterisk. The platform includes mobile integration for rural users, biometric security for safe identification, and even offline transaction features for areas without internet, ensuring no African is left behind in this digital revolution. Asterisk. What's even more impressive is how Kujenga Pay protects data sovereignty. Unlike Western financial systems that store African financial data in offshore servers, Kujenga Pay stores all information in Pan-African data centers managed by regional authorities. No foreign spying, no backdoor surveillance, absolute control. Asterisk. And this isn't just about making payments. It's about enabling economic resistance. Asterisk. When Western nations imposed sanctions or froze assets of African states, there was often no recourse. But now, Kujenga Pay allows these nations to continue trade, pay civil servants, and function financially without bowing to foreign demands. Asterisk. Western banking institutions and global fintech companies have already expressed alarm. They fear that if Kujenga Pay spreads, they'll lose their grip on one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. But African leaders aren't backing down. Asterisk. In fact, at the recent Pan-African Economic Summit, Leaders called for an African Digital Independence Charter, a declaration of economic sovereignty in the digital age, with Kyenga Pay at its heart. And people across West Africa are embracing it. Street vendors, online sellers, NGOs, farmers, and students are rapidly adopting the platform. It's becoming not just a payment method, but a movement. There's even talk of integrating Kyenga Pay into national ID systems, welfare distribution, and public salaries, ensuring transparency, fighting corruption, and keeping every coin. Circulating within Africa.Kyenga Pay is more than just a fintech innovation. It's the financial liberation of a continent in code, in currency. And in principle, Africa is no longer begging to join the global economy. It is building its own.